let's be honest, when we think of the English Bible, one name usually pops into your head, right? King James. We tend to see it as this monumental, singular creation. But what if I told you that's not the real story? That it was actually the end of a much longer, crazier, and more dramatic story? See, the King James Version didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was more like the final chord in this epic piece of music filled with conflict, rebellion, and brilliant scholarship. So to really get it, we have to ask the big question: what came before it? And this wasn't some quiet, academic debate, no way. For almost 100 years before King James, a fierce battle was raging over the very idea of translating the Bible into English. This was a high-stakes fight with real-world consequences, a fight that cost people their lives and would go on to define the future of both the church and the state. Okay, so first things first, let's just get a sense of the whirlwind of activity that was happening. The 1500s saw this absolute explosion of English Bibles, one right after another, each one building on the last and, pushing its own agenda. Just look at this timeline for a second. From 1526 to 1568, that's just over 40 years, we get 6 major English translations. This was not a slow and steady process. It was an intense, rapid-fire, and often really dangerous period of innovation, with every version reacting to and competing with the one that came just before it. At the very heart of this whole saga is a classic struggle, right? It's the individual versus the institution. It was this massive theological and political tug-of-war over one simple question: who gets to control the Word of God in English? And wow, this right here shows you the two polar opposites. On one side, you've got William Tyndale's Bible. This thing was a pure act of defiance. It was illegal, totally unauthorized, and King Henry VIII hated it. Then flip the script. Just 13 years later, you get the Great Bible, which was commissioned by that very same king. The contrast is just staggering. One translator gets executed as a heretic for his work. The other gets a royal commission. Tyndale was using language like a weapon. These choices weren't just about finding the right word. They were deeply political. By picking congregation instead of church, he's shifting the focus from the powerful institution to the people themselves. Using senior instead of priest, well, that directly undermines the authority of the clergy. His translation wasn't just a book, it was a direct threat to the entire power structure of the Catholic Church. So, of course, the crown had to respond, and their answer was the Great Bible. This thing was physically huge, a real symbol of authority, and they literally chained it to the church pulpits. This was all about controlling the narrative, making sure the public only heard an approved version, one that was totally stripped of Tyndale's controversial notes and his so-called dangerous words. This was the establishment taking back control. But here's the thing, it wasn't just a political battle. It was also an intellectual one. A real scholarly race was on to create the most accurate, most authentic translation possible. And to do that, you had to go back to the source. And this led to 2 totally different ways of thinking about translation. Tyndale was a true pioneer. He was a master linguist who insisted on going directly to the original Greek and Hebrew manuscripts. For him, that was the only way to get to the truth. Coverdale, on the other hand, was more pragmatic. He openly admitted he wasn't an expert in those languages. So his Bible was basically a translation of other translations, mostly from Latin and German. This whole obsession with accuracy and authenticity led to a brand new kind of book. It was one designed not just to be read out loud to a crowd, but to be picked apart and studied deeply by individuals. We call it a study Bible today, and it had one key feature that would change absolutely everything. The year that everything changed for the everyday reader was 1560. Because in 1560, the Geneva Bible was published, and it was the very first English Bible to include the numbered verse system that we all take for granted today. And I know it sounds simple, but this was revolutionary. All of a sudden, you could point to a specific passage, you could cross-reference ideas, you could debate theology with incredible precision. It basically turned the Bible from a long, flowing story into a searchable, studiable database. And that innovation, that simple numbering system, really set the stage for the final showdown before the King James Version even existed. It was a battle for the hearts and minds of the English people, pitting the popular favorite against the official state-sponsored alternative. So in one corner, you have the Geneva Bible, the challenger. It was put together by Protestant exiles, it was packed with Calvinist study notes, and it was written in clear, sharp, accessible English. And the public went wild for it. In the other corner, you have the establishment's response, the bishop's Bible. It was created for the sole purpose of replacing the Geneva Bible, but the language was clunky and it completely failed to catch on. It was the official version, sure, but most people just ignored it. And I am not exaggerating how popular the Geneva Bible was. This was the Bible that William Shakespeare read and quoted from. This was the Bible the Pilgrims packed up and carried with them on the Mayflower over to the New World. It was so beloved that it stayed the most popular Bible in English homes for decades, even after the King James Version came out. Which finally brings us back to the King James Version itself. After all this history, all this conflict, all this competition, where did its majestic, iconic, unforgettable language actually come from? Well, the answer is the most stunning part of this entire story. Take a look at this number, 80 to 90%. What in the world could that possibly be referring to? That is the percentage of the King James Version's New Testament that is taken, often word for word, from the translation of William Tyndale. Yes, that's the same man who was hunted down, strangled, and then burned at the stake for the heresy of translating the Bible into English. His words, his phrasing, his rhythm became the very foundation of the book that a king would later authorize. So at the end of the day, the King James Version wasn't some miraculous creation from scratch. It was an evolution. Its true genius wasn't in its originality, but in its synthesis. Its incredible ability to weave together the rebellious language of Tyndale, the scholarly precision of the Geneva Bible, and the official tone of the Great Bible into one seamless, masterful whole. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? The story of the King James Bible is this powerful reminder that so many of the things we think of as these singular works of genius are actually built on the forgotten struggles and the hidden legacies of the people who came before. How many other masterpieces out there are standing on foundations we've never even heard of?